So last night, radical Congressperson Jamaal Bowman, Democrat from New York's 16th congressional district, he lost his primary by nearly 20 points. And this is good news for the country because, as it turns out, Congress could use fewer complete dullars who don't know exactly how doors work or what fire alarms are, or that Israel is not committing a genocide in Gaza, and also that women were, in fact, by Hamas on October 7th. Jamaal Bowman was one of the worst people in Congress. He, of course, will remain in Congress until he finishes his term, but he was ousted dramatically in a very high-spending primary in New York's 16th congressional district. And I think this has some lessons for politics writ large in the United States. 5 lessons in particular. Lesson number 1. It turns out that radical intersectional leftism is really, really unpopular unless you're in a radical left-wing district. So New York's 16th congressional district is about 9% Jewish. A lot of those Jews have voted Democrat habitually, but they're not part of the intersectional coalition. They've been cast out by the intersectional coalition in the aftermath of October 7th, and they do not look kindly on Jamaal Bowman's open appeals to pro-terror supporters. A lot of Jamaal Bowman's money in this particular race came from outside of the district. A lot of focus, as we'll get to, has been put on the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, putting in some $14 million in ad money into this race. Jamaal Bowman also spent millions and millions and millions of dollars. A huge amount of that money was coming from outside of his district, as he himself has acknowledged pretty publicly. And it turns out that when you run in a district that is a little bit more diverse than, say, AOC's district in terms of a Jewish population, or Summer Lee's district in Pennsylvania, that this makes you vulnerable. Radical leftism is not, in fact, all that popular outside of a very few specific enclaves in the United States. This is why Cori Bush, who's running in Missouri's 1st congressional district, she is also vulnerable, even though, again, the Jewish population in that particular district only represents about 2% of the total of that district. She's vulnerable anyway, because that district is not nearly as radical as, say, AOC's district, or Summer Lee's district, or Pramila Jayapal's district in Washington. So Jamaal Bowman gets absolutely clocked last night. This was not a close race. Let's be clear. This had not been a close race for a long time. The early polling data between Jamaal Bowman in New York's 16th congressional district and a fellow named George Latimer, who's a Westchester County executive, that polling data had been very bad for Jamaal Bowman for months. So the late infusion of money from AIPAC really sort of held the ground steady against Jamaal Bowman, but he ends up losing last night by about 20 points. And that, of course, shouldn't be a shock because this is not a district built for radicalism. It turns out that the Bernie Sanders approach to politics is a very specific approach that does not have a lot of takers outside of a few areas of the country. And the Bernie Sanders approach, which used to be class-based and now has morphed into a sort of class and race-based look at American politics, again, that is a very specific ideology that it's a luxury belief system, in other words. And it turns out that, again, outside of a small group of extremely insular places, most people don't like it. So Bernie had cut an ad for Jamaal Bowman. Hakeem Jeffries did a last-minute round of robocalls, donated like $5,000 to Jamaal Bowman, but everybody kind of knew that he was on the way out. Here was Bernie's ad in favor of Jamaal Bowman.
We decide the future of our democracy. We decide that we want universal child care. We want housing as a human right. We want universal health care. We want historic investments in home care to take care of our seniors.
The most important part of this election is whether we have the courage as people to stand up to the oligarchs and tell these billionaires they're not going to control our government. Get everybody you can out to the polls.
So this ridiculous campaign burst into flames. I mean, went down like a Hamas rocket on its own hospitals. Jamaal Bowman came out afterward and he said that he and his supporters will, quote, continue to fight the evils of capitalism, militarism, and racism. That is who we are. That is who we are going to continue to be. Again, the evils of capitalism. That doesn't tend to be a particularly popular perspective outside of a very few people. Which brings us to lesson number 2. Online is not real life. So online, the weeping, the gnashing of teeth, the wailing over Jamaal Bowman's loss is extraordinary. But it turns out the vast majority of Americans are somewhat moderate on politics. Everybody who gets sucked into the echo chamber, that is X.com, Twitter.com, everybody gets sucked into that echo chamber is acting on false premises. I understand why Congress people do it. It's because it used to be that the feedback mechanism you had from your constituents, it used to be letters and phone calls. And the rule in a congressional office was if you got a letter that was representative of maybe 100 of your constituents, you got a phone call that was representative of maybe 50 of your constituents. But here is the thing. On X, a tweet is representative of less than 0 of your constituents. Many of those accounts are sock puppet accounts. Virtually all of the accounts won't be from your district. And the algorithm favors extreme points of view. That is true across social media. So following the political trends on X is actually quite a terrible way of doing politics in the United States, which is why I've suggested to my fellow Republicans that when it comes to campaigning, you might want to go out and touch some grass. You might want to actually, be outside in the world. In this race, Jamaal Bowman had 360,000 Twitter followers. George Latimer had 6,000. George Latimer clocked him by 20% in this race. And you can see it in real time. We'll get to more on this in just one second. First, the cost of living is up almost 20% from when Joe Biden took office. Families everywhere are feeling that burden, but the media keep insisting the economy is totally fine. In fact, a recent Business Insider article makes the case the American people are to blame for this dumpster fire economy. Because it's people's perception of inflation. That's the problem, you see. Well, this is Gaslighting 101. Let me help you find ways to save money in this economic climate. One way to do that is by switching to Pure Talk. If you're one of many American families looking to cut down on your monthly bills, you need to start with your cell phone service. I recommend Pure Talk because it's both affordable and reliable. Pure Talk is rapidly becoming the wireless company of choice for conservatives. Plus, it's great for families because the more lines you add, the more you save. Not to mention, Pure Talk is veteran-led. Instead of funding DEI initiatives, they fund basic services for vets who have served this country. And 100% of their customer service team is located right here in the United States. If you are looking for ways to save money for your family, I recommend switching on over to Pure Talk. Visit puretalk.com/Shapiro. Explore their offers. When you make the switch, you'll get an additional 50% off your very first month of coverage. Visit puretalk.com/Shapiro to upgrade your cell phone service to America's most dependable 5G network and save an extra 50% off that very first month. That's puretalk.com/Shapiro today. So, you remember, over the weekend, AOC did this rally for Jamaal Bowman. It was super weird. She went out there, she was jumping around like a crazed, glue-huffing cheerleader at a local high school. It was very strange. And then, just to prove how cool she was, her own campaign released a video of her jumping around like a nut job at this rally. And here's what it looked like if you don't remember this particular horror show. Look how cool she is. She's skipping around and jumping around like she's at the club. She can't hear you. She can't hear you. Right, and this video released by her campaign makes it look like there are a lot of people here, right? Wow, look at her. She's so charismatic. Oh my God, she's rapping and she's screaming and she's moving her hands. Okay, now, and she's even taken her hair out so that she can show you her hair waving in the wind. Oh my gosh, so much charisma. The riz on this lady, so fresh, so face. Okay, now, here is the reverse angle. Here is the reverse angle of this exact walk-up. There are like 5 people there, and half of them are media. Online is not real life. Online is not real life. Honest to God, I could go to a local restaurant in my area and I would draw a bigger crowd than this without any notice. Look at this nut job waving her arms like a crazy person in front of a crowd of 7 people. My goodness. But again, online, not real life. And it turns out that it's not real life for pretty much anybody. Punchbowl News points out that actually, it wasn't last night just about Jamaal Bowman. Across the board, moderates did really well. In other primary news, they say Representative John Curtis defeated former President Trump's endorsed candidate to win the Republican Senate primary in Utah. Curtis is a moderate on politics in Utah. Representative Celeste Malloy of Utah is ahead of GOP challenger Colby Jenkins by just 4 points. Malloy was, in fact, endorsed by Trump, but Jenkins was endorsed by Mike Lee. As Punchbowl points out, victories by Latimer, Curtis, and Malloy indicate the center is holding in 2024. And that is largely right. It turns out that people generally prefer moderation, at least in affect, when it comes to their politics. Turns out that the nutty charisma of like an AOC or of a Jamaal Bowman waving his arms like a crazy fat bird attempting to get off the ground, waving his arms like a failing windmill the other day at that rally. Turns out that earns you plaudits on X and doesn't earn you a lot of votes in actual primaries. Which brings us to lesson number 3. A lot of talk about the amount of money that AIPAC put into this race. So AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It is not, in fact, a branch of the Israeli government. It has frequently disagreed with the Israeli government, most famously in 2015 when the Israeli government was pushing very, very hard against the Iran deal. And AIPAC, which is in fact dominated at the top level by political Democrats, did nothing about the Iran deal. Okay, but AIPAC put a bunch of money into this race. Why did they put a bunch of money into this race? They did it because Jamaal Bowman was already vulnerable. Political money follows you into a district when you yourself are a crappy candidate for your district. Politico points out that this race, while it was about Israel for a lot of Jewish voters, it was not entirely about Israel. It turns out that Jamaal Bowman is just a terrible congressperson. As Politico points out, other outspoken progressives won their primaries handily, including AOC just last night. While they did not face electorates quite so primed to eject an Israel skeptic, they heeded other lessons. Mind your voting record and personal behavior. The ads against Bowman barely even mentioned Israel. Instead, the focus was on Bowman's votes against Joe Biden's infrastructure law and against raising the debt ceiling. Then there was the fire alarm. As the New York Times' Nicholas Fandos writes, the timing of an episode that resulted in a misdemeanor plea and House censure could hardly have been worse. Opposition researchers turned up old blog posts dabbling in 9/11 conspiracy theories and publicized video of Bowman calling reports Hamas sexually abused Israeli women during its attack propaganda. Also, don't alienate your friends back home. As Politico points out, a more skilled politician might have survived those travails with a local support network in place, but Bowman didn't have that because Latimer had that. That means that even the people in Congress who are supposedly his allies did almost nothing for him. Again, Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, gave him like a $5,000 donation and a late robocall, and that was it. According to one House Democrat, this wasn't about ideology as much as it was about how Bowman went about his job. Quote, nobody who cares about them tried to help, tried to stop them, tried to say, hey, there's a better way. You don't need to do this. You can advocate for your position without alienating the vast majority of voters. In other words, he was a bad congressperson, and he was a bad fit for his own district. And when you are vulnerable, the money follows you into the district. It turns out that high-spending primaries did not occur in, say, AOC's district or in Summerlee's. Both of them are radically anti-Israel. The money didn't follow them there. Why? Because they weren't vulnerable. Bowman made himself vulnerable because he is a fool. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, betting with BetOnline can be a ton of fun. So there are a bunch of prop bets for tomorrow's debate. BetOnline has unveiled 47 of them you can wager on right now. Bet on things like who will be the first to mispronounce a politician's name, Joe Biden, or who will be the first to interrupt a moderator, Donald Trump. BetOnline makes betting more accessible and convenient than ever before. With just a few clicks, you can place bets on your favorite team or events from the comfort of your own home. BetOnline prides themselves on their higher-than-average betting limits of up to $25,000, and you can increase your wagering amounts by contacting their player services desk by phone or email. So while you're watching your favorite team or the news on upcoming elections, why not spice things up with that friendly wager over at BetOnline? Go to betonline.ag to place your bets today. Use promo code BEN for a 50% instant deposit bonus of up to $1,000. That's betonline.ag. Use promo code BEN. I can't wait to bet tomorrow on that debate because, frankly, I think I've got an inside track. I think we'll make a little bit of money. Makes things a lot more spicy, a lot more fun. Go check them out right now. BetOnline. The options are endless. That's betonline.ag. Use promo code BEN to get started. BetOnline. Lesson number 4. Left-wing intersectional radicalism is ugly, and it's vicious, and it stinks. So the reaction to Jamaal Bowman getting his ass kicked, being shown the door, which is a good thing, because frankly, he doesn't know how doors work. So I'm glad that he was shown the door so he can finally learn what a door actually does. But the Omnicause is truly ugly. So the Omnicause, can't remember who coined this term, but it's a genius term. It is a basic answer to the question, why is it that if you're a radical on climate change, you also support Hamas? Why is it that if you support transgenderism, you very likely also support Hezbollah? Why is that? And the answer is the Omnicause. In other words, and what is the Omnicause? Tearing away the system, tearing down the system. And in practice, it's super ugly. So the Sunshine Movement is an environmentalist group. And the Sunshine Movement put out a tweet saying, quote, there isn't another way to say it. F AIPAC. Our hearts are heavy tonight. Jamaal Bowman should be heading back to Congress. So, question, why was he so important to you? It turns out that George Latimer will probably vote how you want him to vote on many environmental issues. So why is he so important to you? And the answer, of course, is that the Omnicause is ever present, and it's ugly, and it makes absolute room for people who hate Jews, because the Omnicause's central unifying field theory of life is that the world is made up of victims and victimizers. And if you are unsuccessful, if you're a loser, it is not because you have made bad decisions. It is not because you ought to change your own life. It is because the system is victimizing you. And that means disproportionately successful groups are the victimizers. Jews are disproportionately successful. This means that they are bad. And that philosophy has really ugly consequences. By the way, you can see Jamaal Bowman doing this himself. So in his giant failure speech, in his concession speech, he said a few things of interest. First, he thanked the Muslim community in his race, which is interesting because we've been told that the only outside money that came in was AIPAC money. But here he is openly admitting that he was getting money from, say, Dearborn, Michigan and San Francisco because the Omnicause.
I want us to acknowledge publicly together the power of the Muslim community. Y'all could do better than that. You don't understand what the Muslim community specifically did in this race.
Well, I wonder why they intervened in this race. Why this race and not other races? Could it have to do with the fact that Jamaal Bowman is a denier? That Jamaal Bowman has been thoroughly pro-Hamas throughout the entire conflict? Maybe it's that. But apparently that sort of outside money is totally fine. It's AIPAC that is obviously the problem. And this sort of thing smacks of when a Democrat loses to a Republican and then the Democrat complains about the NRA, which was the stock in trade for 20 years, that the NRA was a nefarious force. And it wasn't that a lot of constituents in the district just didn't like the person and also happened to be pro-gun rights. It had to be the evils of the NRA. You only hear, by the way, the left wing complain about money in politics when they lose. Meanwhile, the left wing spends exorbitant sums of cash. In fact, AIPAC and yelling at AIPAC and suggesting that AIPAC is an emissary of a foreign nation, that is perfectly well within all boundaries, according to Democrats. Not anti-Semitic at all to do that, to say that Jews are buying the elections. But if George Soros spends billions of dollars on politics to elect local district attorneys to undermine Americanism, and you mention George Soros' name, then the left calls you an anti-Semite. So, again, the double standard is pretty glaring. Here is Jamaal Bowman suggesting that the real reason he lost his AIPAC, despite the fact he was losing by nearly 20 points before AIPAC even got into the race.
Even as I've talked to voters, there are some who are like, I don't want to share who I voted for. I don't want my neighbors to know. It's gotten intense.
It's intense because AIPAC are bullies. AIPAC intimidates people. And my opponent has sided not just with AIPAC, but with Republican billionaires. And because he's been in office so long and because he's been county executive giving people jobs, people are afraid.
AIPAC are the bullies, not the people who side with Jamaal Bowman, who chant outside synagogues and try to beat people up. Those people are excellent allies to the campaign. AIPAC are the bullies. By the way, talk about sowing and reaping. The Justice Democrats who backed Jamaal Bowman, and they're big supporters of AOC, they're many of the people who selected AOC for her congressional seat in the first place. A little bit earlier this year, they put out a campaign memo saying they launched a research and polling effort in late 2022 to counter AIPAC's attack ads and, quote, make AIPAC toxic in the Democratic Party. They noticed that the Jamaal Bowman campaign used their material in his messaging and polling. They then put out a statement after he got his ass kicked, quote, this race was not a referendum on Israel-Palestine policies. Maybe it was. Just a little bit. Meanwhile, again, the reason that George Latimer won is because he's just normal D. That's it. He's a normal Democrat. Jamaal Bowman is a refugee from the radical intersectional insane asylum. And George Latimer is a normal Democrat in a normal Democratic district. Here is George Latimer's victory speech.
Find a way to come together. This country cannot afford to splinter into little pieces, and every single representative has to understand the necessity for unity, so that we can move forward as a nation.
Okay, so that brings us finally to lesson number 5. The echo chamber that we talked about with regard to X, that online is not real. There is also a media echo chamber, and the media echo chamber has featured people like Jamaal Bowman. Remember, Stephen Colbert had on Jamaal Bowman on his show just a couple of nights ago, trying to promote this Hamas-supporting tool bag, who is so stupid that he believes that fire alarms open doors. That guy. Stephen Colbert had him on to talk about how he had principal energy. Remember this? AOC has been featured on the cover of magazines. The up-and-comers are Ilhan Omar, terrorist supporter, Rashida Tlaib, terrorist supporter. These are the people the media love. And guess what? That media echo chamber is not helping Democrats. It is hurting Democrats because it makes Democrats believe that they have momentum when they don't. So after his victory, Abby Phillip then grilled George Latimer, claiming that he was an Islamophobe, which is just, I'm sorry, this is ridiculous. Why? Because George Latimer pointed out that Jamaal Bowman had gotten a bunch of support from Dearborn, Michigan and San Francisco, which, as you heard a moment ago, Jamaal Bowman literally said. Also, by the way, when George Latimer suggested that Jamaal Bowman was getting support from Dearborn, what he meant by that is that Dearborn is an incredibly radical, pro-Islamist place by the data, by the pictures, by the video. And that's the people who support Jamaal Bowman, which happens to be true. But here's Abby Phillip trying to go after George Latimer, suggesting he's an Islamophobe. And if you listen to the media, then the battle between Latimer and Bowman is just a battle between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, when in reality, it's a battle between sanity and insanity. But here is CNN doing what they do.
You're critiquing Jamaal Bowman for getting money from outside of the district, from Dearborn, Michigan. That was viewed as, by Bowman, an Islamophobic dog whistle. Could you just address that and also address how you can make that critique while also receiving money from outside of the district as well?
Now, what I said was referring to where he had raised money from. It's not a dog whistle of anything. He had a major fundraiser in California. He raised more money in California in the last report than he made from New York. So it wasn't a dog whistle about California. And as far as Dearborn, Michigan is concerned, Representative Tlaib and the incumbent formed a joint fundraising committee on February 14th. She draws her money from her district, and she's based in Dearborn, Michigan. It's a geographic reference, not a demographic reference.
Okay, again, the fact the media have tried to make this into an Islamophobia issue just demonstrates what the media are. So again, the 5 lessons from Jamaal Bowman getting his ass kicked. 1, radical leftism, radically unpopular outside of a few radical left-wing enclaves. 2, online is not real life. 3, political money is going to follow vulnerable candidates into vulnerable districts. 4, left-wing intersectionalism is ugly and radical and stupid. And 5, the media echo chamber is hurting Democrats. Why does this all matter? It has national ramifications, which brings us to the presidential race. So Joe Biden, all he had to do, the basis of his election in 2020, is that he was a dead man who was moderate. That was the entire thing, that he was the George Latimer of the presidential race. He was just kind of a normal Democrat in a super abnormal time. And then he proceeded to turn his administration over to nut jobs. He proceeded to turn his administration into a radical left policy think tank. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, as social unrest escalates and crime rates climb, securing the safety of your family is really, really important. Introducing the Byrna Less Lethal Pistol Launcher. It's been developed by a team of common sense gun owners who understand the importance of having choices. They engineered the Byrna launcher as a powerful tool for self-defense, allowing users to de-escalate threatening situations without resorting to deadly force. Now listen, I'm a gun owner. I love the Second Amendment. I have 4 pistols, a shotgun, and an AR. But the fact is that if, God forbid, I had to do something in my home, it might be nice to have an alternative option that doesn't involve possible death. Well, this is where Byrna comes in. There are legal problems if, God forbid, you actually have to shoot somebody in your home using lethal force. The Byrna is a safer, more sensible alternative that could potentially save lives on both sides, protecting both the user and the aggressor. For those who are adverse to owning a firearm, the Byrna is the optimal choice, delivering formidable stopping power without having to take a life. Prevents accidents, too. The Byrna is an indispensable tool to keep you and your family safe. It's legal in all 50 states. No background checks or permits required. They've received over 15,000 4.5-star reviews, and they are hand-assembled in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The Byrna isn't just an option. It's an essential component of responsible, non-lethal protection. Visit Byrna.com/Ben for 10% off your purchase. That's BYRNA.com/Ben to check out the latest news about Byrna. That's BYRNA. So Nancy Pelosi was interviewed yesterday by Anderson Cooper on CNN. And here are the issues she thinks are at the top of the heap for Democrats. When you say San Francisco supported Jamaal Bowman, well, San Francisco is now defining Joe Biden's policy agenda for 2024, according to Nancy Pelosi.
I saw a poll today that said among young people 18 to 30 that Biden was ahead by 23 points, that people did care about a woman's right to choose, LGBTQ and minority issues. They cared about the planet and the rest. So, again, we don't agonize, we organize to get out that vote.
It's trans rights and climate issues. That's going to be the campaign for Joe Biden. Well, good luck with that. You want to run Jamaal Bowman's campaign? We'll see how that works for you nationally. Meanwhile, the Obama pod bros over at Pod Save America, they've been lamenting the state of the race. They're sounding the alarm. They're saying they think that Biden will eventually pull it out because the American people will come around, but they too are freaking out.
If you look at polls of voters who say that they're following the race closely, getting their news from TV, getting their news from newspapers, Joe Biden has a huge lead with those voters, and that's true within the Democratic Party as well. I think where he's struggling is among younger voters, black voters, Latino voters, white voters, people who just aren't paying as close attention to politics, who aren't tuned in. And one of the reasons they're not tuned in is because they're cynical about politics and they're frustrated about politics.
Okay, that's So the low information voters are going to come back to him. Good luck with that particular appeal. Okay, which brings us to the debate. So the debate is tomorrow night. And the question is going to be Donald Trump's tactics more than anything else. So Hillary Clinton is back and she's worse than ever. She has a piece in the New York Times called "I've Debated Trump and Biden. Here's what I'm watching for," because this is what you need, is input from Hillary Clinton. Under all circumstances, we need input from Hillary Clinton. So just a reminder, here's how Donald Trump shellacked Hillary Clinton during their set of debates, just so we have some context for this. Here are some of Donald Trump's greatest hits.
This was locker room talk. I'm not proud of it. I apologize to my family. I apologize to the American people. If you look at Bill Clinton, far worse, minor words, and his was action. Hillary Clinton attacked those same women.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail. We have a divided nation because people like her, and believe me, she has tremendous hate in her heart. And when she said deplorables, she meant it.
Okay. He clocked her a lot. That was October 2016. So here's what Hillary is now advising to Joe Biden. Quote, "Last week I had the time of my life at the Tony Awards introducing a song from Suffs, the Broadway musical I co-produced about the suffragists who won women the right to vote." By the way, you want to talk about making a public appeal? That is a way to really draw in those blue-collar voters, is to talk about how you co-produced a Broadway musical about the suffragettes and you had a great time at the Tony Awards. This is a woman of the people, is Hillary Clinton. From Suffs to Hamilton, I love theater about politics, but not the other way around. Too often we approach pivotal moments like this week's debate between President Biden and Donald Trump like drama critics. We're picking a president, not the best actor. I'm the only person to have debated both men, says Hillary Clinton. I know the excruciating pressure of walking onto that stage and that it is nearly impossible to focus on substance when Mr. Trump is involved. In our 3 debates in 2016, he unleashed a blizzard of interruptions, insults, and lies that overwhelmed the moderators and did a disservice to the country who tuned in to learn about our visions for the country. It is a waste of time to try to refute Mr. Trump's argument like in a normal debate. It's nearly impossible to identify what his arguments even are. He starts with nonsense and then digresses into blather. This has only gotten worse in the years since we debated. I was not surprised that after a recent meeting, several chief executives said Trump, as one journalist described it, could not keep a straight thought and was all over the map. Yet expectations for him are so low that if he doesn't literally light himself on fire on Thursday evening, some will say he was downright presidential. Now, this part is correct, actually. Not that Trump is scattered and crazy, but the reality is that we've talked about the low expectations for Joe Biden, namely that he stays alive and breathes. The expectations for Trump are also low. If Trump is not volatile on the stage, he probably wins. If Trump is not volatile on the stage, if he is in control, Trump, he probably wins. This part Hillary is correct about. We'll get to more on this in just 1 second. First, if you've checked out what our public schools are doing lately with the kids, it's trash. I mean, they are truly indoctrinating kids in everything from CRT to radical gender theory. The garbage they are pushing is terrible. I literally wrote a book on this like 20 years ago called Brainwash. A huge percentage of today's teachers are graduating from woke universities where Marxist professors teach them they must go forth and indoctrinate your kids with their ideology. You need to get your kids out of government-controlled schools and into Freedom Project Academy. FPA has perfected online learning, offering live, on-demand, and homeschool courses for kids K through 12. Freedom Project Academy was built on Judeo-Christian values and classical curricula. Students read full books, write in cursive, they study the full scope of history. Many graduate with knowledge years above their public school peers. Right now, you can save 10% on tuition when you enroll at freedomforschool.com. That's freedomforschool.com. Check out their fully accredited courses and teachers' preview classes and request a free information packet. Subscribe to their Rumble channel to stay informed on what's happening in America's schools. We as a nation can't afford to hand over another generation to the left. Take back your kids' education at Freedom Project Academy. Enroll at freedomforschool.com. That's freedomforschool.com. She says he interrupts in Bullies. He stalked me around the stage at one point. That was the dumbest thing about the 2016 election, was when Hillary was claiming that Donald Trump was like walking around following her on the stage and threatening her. It is a really, really ridiculous pseudo-feminist line. She says he wants to appear dominant and throw his opponent off balance. These ploys will fall flat if Mr. Biden is as direct and forceful as he was when engaging Republican hecklers at the State of the Union address in March. The president has facts and truth on his side. In 2016, I prepared intensely for the debate, says Hillary Clinton, because I knew I had to find a way to cut through Mr. Trump's antics and help the American people understand what was really at stake. In 90-minute mock debates on an identical stage, I practiced keeping my cool in the face of hard questions and outright lies about my record and character. A longtime advisor played Mr. Trump and did everything he could do to provoke, rattle, and enrage me. It worked. Unfortunately, Mr. Biden starts from a disadvantage because there's no way he can spend as much time preparing as I did 8 years ago. Being president isn't a day job. It's an everything, everywhere, all at once job. as viewers, we should try not to get hung up on theatrics. Here are 3 things to watch for. So she's basically admitting from the outset that Trump is likely to win the debate. She's admitting that in theatrical terms, Trump is likely to win. But here's what she says, quote, first, pay attention to how the candidates talk about people, not just policies. And then she talks about Roe versus Wade. She says on Thursday, Trump will most likely say he wants to leave abortion to the states. He hopes that sounds moderate, but it really means he's endorsing the most extreme abortion, yada, yada, yada. Okay, but can Joe Biden talk credibly about people? He's the least sympathetic person in American politics. Every time something bad happens to someone else, all he does is reflect it back at himself and talk about how heartbroken he was when Beau died. Second, says Hillary Clinton, Americans should try to see through the bluster and focus on the fundamentals at stake. Okay, again, that is a kind of call for everyone to focus in on January 6th, but that's not going to work if Trump is able to point out clearly that this race is about 2024, not about 2020. Finally, she says, third, when you see these 2 men side by side, think about the real choice in this election. It's between chaos and competence. Again, this dog is not going to hunt because Joe Biden is not competent and he is chaotic. The world is a significantly more chaotic place under Joe Biden than it was under Donald Trump. It doesn't matter what Trump tweets. It matters how the world is. The world is a worse place because Joe Biden is president of the United States. Now, for his part, Donald Trump is doing the right thing. He is now increasing expectations ahead of the debate for Joe Biden, as I've suggested that he should do for the last couple of months. Setting the bar higher than not dead would be good. Here was Donald Trump the other day saying that actually Joe Biden is a worthy debater when they've jabbed him full of drugs, which is true.
Do you believe he's in cognitive decline, Mr. President?
Well, I shouldn't be the one to say that, but I don't think he's doing particularly well. But I didn't think he was well 25 years ago. I thought he was not a smart person. And that was told to me by a certain member of the Kennedy family who was actually very friendly with me through a Palm Beach relationship. And I was told that very strongly. But so I was never a fan of his. But I will say he beat Paul Ryan. It was still years ago, but he beat Paul Ryan pretty badly. And I assume he's going to be somebody that will be a worthy debater. Yeah, I would say. I think okay. I don't want to underestimate him.
Again, that is smart. Meanwhile, the White House is making a bit of a critical mistake. Karine Jean-Pierre says Joe Biden will meet the moment. So Democrats are actually now making the mistake that Trump was making earlier. They're now talking down Trump and talking up their boy. That's the wrong move. What they actually should be doing is saying, listen, Joe Biden is in fact 81 years old, but everybody knows that he's a solid, genteel citizen. And Donald Trump is a rough and tough debater. It's going to be a rough debate for President Biden, but we expect that he'll pull through. Instead, they're really saying that Joe Biden is going to be like a masterful commander of the material. Good luck.
As you know, when there is an opportunity for this president to speak to millions of Americans, he shows up and he meets the moment. So obviously the president's going to look forward to Thursday doing just that, laying out what he normally does, what he's done the last 3.5 years, how he's going to continue to build on the economy. We're talking about historic numbers in creating jobs, low unemployment rate, and not forgetting that we can't leave communities that have been normally left behind.
So again, talk up your guy and talk down Trump. This is what Democrats are now attempting to do. We'll see if that works out for them. I don't know. I feel like they're now making the mistake that I'd warned Trump not to make, which is don't lower expectations for your opponent. They're now basically suggesting that Trump is going to set himself on fire on the stage. Hillary herself is saying this, and she's right about this, actually. The Democrats have set the bar for Trump at does not actually explode into flames, does not experience instantaneous conflagration. I mean, okay, you want to lower that bar for Trump. That might not go the way you expect it to go. In just 1 second, we'll get to Joe Biden's attempt to basically buy off dictatorships to lower oil prices. First, tomorrow night, you have a unique opportunity to watch the presidential debate with commentary that actually makes some sense. Here is the deal. DailyWire Plus is simulcasting the whole debate. But let's be honest, you need more than just the candidates' rhetoric. That's why we're hosting a special live DailyWire Backstage you absolutely can't miss, bringing you live unfiltered commentary from the most trusted voices in conservative media. You'll get real-time analysis from me, Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, Andrew Klavan, and Jeremy Boring. We're kicking things off at 8:30 p.m. Eastern with a pre-show that will arm you with everything you need to cut through the political noise. During the debate, we'll be breaking down every claim, every policy point, and yes, every leftist talking point the moderators inevitably slip in. Because we believe in giving you the full story, we're not stopping when the debate ends. Our post-show recap will dissect what all this means for the future of our republic. Watch it all live on DailyWire Backstage tomorrow night starting at 8:30 p.m. Eastern over at DailyWire.com. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, desperate for re-election, is now going soft, even softer than normal, on Russia and Iran. According to the Wall Street Journal, the Biden administration wants to keep gas prices stable ahead of the election by encouraging oil to flow into global markets. The effort has run square into another priority, being tough on adversaries Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. Now remember, it's the Democrats and the media who've been claiming that Donald Trump is the cat's paw of the Russians. Meanwhile, it is Joe Biden who's making concessions to the Russians in the middle of a war with Ukraine, the Iranians in the middle of a multi-front war that they are waging against Israel, and Venezuela as, by the way, it threatens to invade a neighboring country in South America. According to the Wall Street Journal, the policy has led to softer than expected sanctions on major oil producers, according to diplomats, former government officials, and energy industry players briefed by current officials. A case in point arrived on Tuesday, when the U.S. levied fresh sanctions against Iran. The measures affect a fraction of the country's oil exports and are unlikely to gum up global markets, according to analysts. A senior administration official said the president has wanted to do everything he could to make sure American consumers have the lowest possible price at the pump, as it affects families' daily lives. So while Iran is mobilizing terrorists all around the Middle East, Joe Biden is going easy on them in terms of sanctions to ensure lower oil prices for his reelect. And he's doing the same thing in Russia, and he's doing the same thing in Venezuela. What a coward he is. Truly a coward. Meanwhile, his immigration policy continues to be an enormous, dangerous failure. In the shock report of the day, NBC News is now reporting that the Department of Homeland Security has identified over 400 immigrants who have come to the U.S. from Central Asia and elsewhere as, quote, subjects of concern because they were brought in by an ISIS-affiliated human smuggling network. Here is NBC's report on this shocking story.
NBC News has learned more than 50 migrants with potential ties to an ISIS-affiliated smuggling network are at large in America. Many illegally crossed the border and were released into the U.S. by Border Patrol because there was no information suggesting terror ties at the time. Now their whereabouts are unknown as immigration agents look to arrest them, U.S. officials tell us, saying they're among a group of over 400 migrants DHS identified in the U.S. from Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Moldova, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, and Russia as subjects of concern because they were brought to the U.S. by an ISIS-affiliated smuggling network.
Again, this is all because of Joe Biden's loose immigration policy. The question when it comes to immigration is how many Americans are going to have to die in order for Joe Biden to win re-election. Which brings up the story of Jocelyn Nungare in Houston. She was a 12-year-old girl who was killed by an illegal immigrant. According to the New York Times, the killing of a 12-year-old Houston girl found last week in a shallow water of a city drainage ditch after having been strangled was already a horrific crime. It doesn't get any worse, said the city's mayor, John Whitmer. Then investigators arrested 2 recent Venezuelan migrants and charged them with killing the girl. Suddenly, the killing, which had ripped apart a Houston family, became the latest flashpoint in a debate over immigration. Notice, the New York Times, the way that it works is when a story does not benefit Democrats, the story is about Republicans pouncing. That is always the way that this works, always and forever. Governor Greg Abbott of Texas has urged the death penalty for the men, saying Jocelyn would, quote, be alive today if Biden enforced immigration laws at the border. That, of course, is true. And the fact is that Joe Biden's policies will get people around the world killed, all so he can win re-election. Joe Biden's open border policies are a sop to his radical left. And going back to Jamaal Bowman, it ain't going to win him election. Radical left-wing policies are unpopular. Joe Biden is getting his ass kicked on the immigration issue by Donald Trump. And when it comes to foreign policy, going soft on Russia and Iran and Venezuela in order to lower the price of gas at the pump by pennies after a 44% increase in average national gas price, that ain't going to do it either. But Joe Biden is desperate at this point. How desperate is Joe Biden at this point? Well, he's pulling out all the stops. Yesterday, in the stupidest story of the day, 16 Nobel Prize-winning economists suggested that Donald Trump would ruin the economy. And here's what Axios says. 16 Nobel Prize-winning economists are jumping into the presidential campaign with a stark warning. Former President Trump's plans would reignite inflation and cause lasting harm to the global economy if he wins in November. The Nobel laureates are sending their academic prestige to a political argument the Biden administration has been making for weeks. Inflation would be worse under Trump. Democrats have been attempting to play off the fact that Joe Biden has brought about 40-year highs in inflation. These economists claim that Donald Trump's policies are going to increase inflation. The question I have is how many of these so-called genius economists predicted inflation at the beginning of Joe Biden's term? The answer, as far as I'm aware, none of them. The message has been spearheaded by, wait for it, Joseph Stiglitz. He won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2001, and he is also a socialist redistributionist. He was joined by a bunch of other economists, none of whom I'm aware actually predicted the increase in prices thanks to Joe Biden's economic plans. So if they didn't predict the last inflationary cycle, I'm not exactly going to rely on them to predict this inflationary cycle. This all smacks of that time 51 so-called intelligence experts testified just before the 2020 election that Joe Biden's son Hunter had a laptop and that laptop was Russian disinformation. So I don't buy it. You trotting out a bunch of like-minded Nobel Prize winners doesn't mean that anyone is going to believe you. Meanwhile, Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, she is trying to blame Donald Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act for economic shortcomings, which, again, I noticed that those economic shortcomings only became apparent with COVID and then were exacerbated by Joe Biden entering office and spending more money than God.
The signature policy from the Trump years was the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and it promised an investment boom, which really did not materialize. It gave huge tax breaks to corporations and to wealthy individuals, and it resulted in an enormous increase in the deficit and lowered tax revenues below historic norms. And I think it's responsible for many of the problems that we face now with our fiscal trajectory. And so that would concern me to leave all of that in place.
Let me point out that people only fail up as long as they are Democrats in the industry of economics. Janet Yellen was, of course, the chair of the Federal Reserve from 2014 to 2018 with her loose fiscal policy. So, again, trotting these people out to pretend the economy is fine except for Trump, that is not going to work. Meanwhile, in other news from the experts, the Surgeon General of the United States has now declared that there is a national public health crisis with regard to guns. Again, if this is the Biden administration pitch, that people like this guy, that people like the Surgeon General know what they're talking about, this is Vivek Murthy, that gun violence is a public health emergency. It's just clown world over there. Here's Vivek Murthy claiming that the guns are the problem, of course. I guess they're contagious. I know whenever I see a gun crime on TV, a crime including a gun, I immediately, my gun is out of control. I go to my safe, I open it up, all four of my pistols, my shotgun and my AR all immediately jump out into my hands and start firing randomly because it's contagious, you know. Here we go.
Today, for the first time in the history of our office, I am issuing a Surgeon General's advisory on firearm violence. It outlines the urgent threat firearm violence poses to the health and well-being of our country. The Surgeon General's advisory lays out the approach we can take to address firearm violence as the public health crisis that it is. This includes implementing community violence prevention programs and firearm risk reduction strategies, improving access to mental health care for those exposed to or at risk for firearm violence.
Everything's a public health crisis, right? He declared loneliness a public health crisis as well. Now, this is one of the problems when you see government as the solution rather than government as part of the problem. Meanwhile, other experts are coming out now and trying to claim that pro-life laws are somehow increasing the mortality rate. In the greatest example of manipulating statistics I've seen in the recent past, according to the Associated Press, in the wake of Texas' abortion ban, the state's infant death rate increased and more died of birth defects, according to a study published by Johns Hopkins University. The researchers looked at how many infants died before their first birthday after Texas adopted its abortion ban in September 2021. They compared infant deaths in Texas to those in 28 states, some also with restrictions. They calculated there were 216 more deaths in Texas than expected between March and December the next year. They said the 2022 mortality rate for infants went up 8% to 5.75 per 1,000 live births compared to a 2% increase for the rest of the United States. Okay, so let me explain how to manipulate statistics here. This is like an amazing classic example. So what they are saying is that because of the abortion ban, more children were born who had congenital defects and problems and who died in their first year of life. And so overall, the number of babies who were born who died, the rate went up. Okay, well, that's a weird way of putting that stat because I have another stat for you. Before the abortion ban, let's say all those babies and many other babies were killed in the womb. It turns out their mortality rate was 100%, not 5.75 per 1,000, 100%. In other words, when more babies live who otherwise would have been aborted, then also some of those babies who have defects are going to die. But if you had the abortion ban not in place, not only would all of those babies have died, but many other babies also would have died. And you want to undermine the expert class, particularly in medicine? This is the way to do it. Send out the Surgeon General to talk about gun violence and then proclaim at Johns Hopkins University that the infant mortality rate went up because you were killing fewer babies in the womb. Really solid stuff there from our scientific experts. Tough science ruling again. Get to more on this in a moment. First, are you still struggling with those back taxes or unfiled returns? Well, the IRS is coming. They've escalated collections by adding 20,000 new agents and sending millions of demand letters. Handling this alone can be a huge mistake. It can cost you thousands of bucks. In these challenging times, your best offense is Tax Network USA. With over 14 years of experience, the experts at Tax Network USA have saved clients millions in back taxes. Regardless of the size of your tax issue, their expertise is your advantage. Tax Network USA offers 3 key services. First, protection. Upon signing up, Tax Network USA will immediately contact the IRS to secure a protection order, ensuring aggressive collection activities like garnishments, levies, or property seizures are halted, providing you peace of mind and financial security. Second, compliance. If you haven't filed in a while, if you need amended returns or you're missing records, Tax Network USA's expert tax preparers will update all your filings, eliminating the risk of IRS enforcement. And third, settlement. Tax Network USA will evaluate your financials and create a settlement strategy to reduce or eliminate your tax debt, putting it behind you for good. The IRS is the largest collection agency on planet Earth. Now that tax season is over, collection season has begun. Tax Network USA can help with state tax issues as well. For a complimentary consultation, call today at 1-800-245-6000 or visit their website at tnusa.com/Shapiro. That's 1-800-245-6000 or visit tnusa.com/Shapiro today. Don't let the IRS take advantage of you. Get the help you need with Tax Network USA. Meanwhile, Joe Biden did have a bad day in the courts yesterday. 2 separate federal courts ruled against Joe Biden's latest attempt to end around the Supreme Court. Remember that time that Joe Biden says that he really, really believes in the rule of law? Like he loves the rule of law, particularly when Donald Trump is getting convicted? Well, he doesn't love the rule of law so much, particularly when it comes to the Supreme Court. According to Reason.com, the new loan forgiveness plan, known as the SAVE plan, which would discharge at least $156 billion in federally backed student loan debt, is a successor to the one the Supreme Court invalidated in Biden versus Nebraska. But 2 separate federal district courts ruled against its legality in lawsuits brought by different coalitions of GOP-led states. By the way, the judges who ruled against Joe Biden here were both Barack Obama appointees. So he's just having a rough time in the courts. So he's just going to rail against the courts, and so are his allies. Here's Nancy Pelosi suggesting the Supreme Court has gone rogue, which is weird because they just did like an 8-1 decision in favor of particular aspects of gun control, for example. But here's Nancy. Again, these are all the institutionalists. These are the people who are going to save democracy. That'd be like Nancy Pelosi ripping on the Supreme Court and saying it's corrupt now.
You know, they've yet to rule on this immunity thing, all this thing about Alito and the flags and Clarence Thomas and his wife. I mean, do you have confidence in the Supreme Court?
No, I think they've gone rogue. It's most unfortunate. But it's unfortunate further to see what the other justice, what happened to the Chief Justice? Did he go weak or did he go rogue? I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, these are people who deeply respect the rule of law. I'm sure that the anchors at the debate tomorrow night will ask Joe Biden about that, his respect for the rule of law while he rips on the Supreme Court. That would be the actual question, because they're going to ask Donald Trump about January 6th and election denial and all of that kind of stuff and suggest he's a threat to democracy and the institutions of the republic. Will they ask Joe Biden about the fact that his party has threatened to pack the court and that Joe Biden says that the Supreme Court is now filled with corrupt people and has lost its legitimacy? I wonder. Okay, so speaking of CNN, obviously they're going to moderate the debate tomorrow night. And why not, with all of their journalistic credibility? So yesterday, CNN's Sarah Sidner had on a drag queen who calls himself Brigitte Bandit to talk about how it's a scary time to exist in America as a drag queen. I noticed it's not scary enough for you not to be on national TV wearing drag. So it doesn't seem that scary. Honestly, when I first saw this, I wondered which one of these people was the CNN anchor, because CNN is so filled with clowns.
We already see so many attacks on our queer community. I already don't feel safe in my own hometown, just dressed in drag like this. And it's very scary for queer people to exist in a time where we see this kind of rhetoric being pushed by our lawmakers and the people who should care about other issues that actually affect the American people, other than attacking our community, our LGBTQIA plus community. It's very disappointing, and I hope for better for our country.
Why would people look weirdly at this person? Why? I don't understand. But I mean, that looks perfectly normal to me. Why would you look weirdly at that. But CNN has its own perspective on this. Here's Sarah Sidner from CNN praising the look.
The Queens are calling on lawmakers to pass a National Equality Act. It could amend the 1964 Civil Rights Act to provide explicit protections for LGBTQ individuals. Joining me now is drag queen and activist Bridget Bandit. Thank you, darling. Wow, what a wonderful look you have this morning. I know that took you some time. I'm curious.
I apparently I've been informed I'm in error. That's a woman dressed as a man, dressed as a woman. I'm not kidding. It's a drag queen who is a woman. So we now have, we've now moved beyond the boundaries of logic. So this woman couldn't just, be a woman. She had to dress up as a man, dressed up as a woman. But it's society that has a problem, folks. It's society and our lack of tolerance that has a woman that is a woman. Bandit is non-binary and uses both she, her, and they, them pronouns. Wow. What a country we've created for ourselves, folks. George Washington would have been so proud. Alrighty, coming up, we'll be discussing everything political, including the upcoming UK elections with Douglas Carswell. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.